Hello, hello. We are live now, I hope. And I hope it's clear that I'm being connected to YouTube right now in a correct way. Let me see. That let me just see that everything works right now. Does it work on the end of my viewers currently? All right. Seems that we are live right now. And in this live stream, I'm going to actually discuss the matter of religion and how we go about studying it in an academic way, roughly, and I will also discuss how we discuss religion generally in a more non-academic way, or more regular way that you do in everyday life when you have, for example, religious discussions or debates. And that is going to be the aim of this live stream. If at any time you, my viewers, want to ask questions or the like, please post them in the comment section here, and I will try to respond to them as quickly as possible during the live stream. Everything clear? Then I will try to present my screen right now. I'm still a bit, unused to using, the streaming program that I'm using to stream here on YouTube. So you have to excuse me if I sometimes make mistakes or takes a little bit of time. Right, let's see. All right, now we have this PowerPoint presentation. And I am just seeing something that disturbs me a bit. I'm just going to put a blank space here between, because otherwise it just looks stupid and it disturbs me a bit. Anyway, as I said before, this live stream will be discussing the studying of religion in an academic way and discussing religion. Religion, which is a very important and sensitive topic, which I hope I will treat with the severity it demands as I discuss these two approaches to discussing this highly contentious subject or topic or field of study or field of culture, or whatever you want to apply to religion, because religion is a huge subject. Anyway, first let's start off with that there is a difference between discussing religion and studying religion academically. And when it comes to discussing or debating religion, it is usually not in an academic way in our everyday life. And it's usually built upon relational issues, like you want to discuss something that your friend believes in regards to religion, or you have a sort of relationship to your religion that demands that you go out and convince people of your religious worldview or the like. Usually, most discussing and debating of religion in a more everyday context outside of the study of religion academically is goal oriented. There is an ought here. There are value judgments because religion is usually connected a lot to what ought to be or how you ought to act in situations. And thus, there are a lot of elements of convincing and arguing a case with aims such as conversions of other people to your religious worldview or arguing a political point that is dependent upon your religious worldview. In contrast, studying religion is usually, when we talk about it in an academic sense, is studying how the religion is practiced or studying their sources, its role in society. And it's not only just studying religion, it's also doing it analytically, trying to explain why certain religions are as they are, or what implications exist with regards to certain religious traditions and the like. Now, this does also include discussions, especially among academics, about how you should interpret a certain religious practice or religious belief and how it interacts with greater society and the like. But it's not the same as discussing religion. The aim here is more about trying to be better at describing phenomena rather than convincing people about what is right or wrong with regards to religion. Though there are not always a clear difference. As, for example, theological studies, where you study a religion inside of a religion in order to better your knowledge of that religion as a man of that religion, is kind of an in between discussing and debating religion generally in a much more goal oriented way and studying religion in this more academic theoretical analytical framework that is usually done in academia at universities and done in order to better understand religion in its context. Was that clear? Does anyone want to comment something or add any questions among the viewers? Or should I proceed on? As I don't see anyone having posted a question or something, I will proceed on, but I will go back to answer them if you do it during the presentation. And you can also actually ask me about things that aren't directly related to what I'm actually talking about in this presentation. You can ask me about other things and I will try to answer those as well. As I try to have a sort of interaction here between you and me when I do these live streams. As these live streams are more of an opportunity for me to interact with my viewers rather than the more one-way interaction that is more the case with my more regular videos. But let's go back to the presentation then. All right, as I discussed before, there are two very different approaches here, as we are talking about discussing and debating religion in a more general sense and studying religion academically. They are not the same and should be seen as two different things. Though there is, of course, not always a clear difference, as I said before, with theological studies kind of a being kind of a in between, and there are some cases where you could argue that studying does involve a lot about uh, value judgments and does actually include implications about what ought to be as well. Especially, for example, the field of the philosophy of religion does include a lot of this, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. We will be getting into this more as I talk more about this. Now, studying religion can roughly be divided into two ways of going about it. In an ethic, and this ethic has nothing to do with ethics, though it is related to that because it's kind of a framework of what defines your morals. But here in the study of religion, ethics, or an ethic, or rather the ethic view, means the outside perspective of studying a religion from the outside, of looking into another religion and trying to analyze it from the outside in the study of religion. An emic perspective, in contrast, means the inside perspective of viewing a religion from the inside, of trying to view it from the perspective of the believer, rather than trying to analyze the religion from the outside and explaining things from an outside perspective. These are two terms I'm going to use a lot in this presentation. Hopefully, if I remember to use them also during this presentation, because sometimes you say that you will use a lot of important terminology, but you end up simplifying it or not using it. But I just wanted to say that these two terms are kind of important when we discuss the study of religion academically. And when it comes to the academic study of religion, there are certain principles that are reoccurring that needs to be considered usually. Though a lot of these principles have a lot of exceptions to them, so they aren't always like this, but generally. And the first is that religion is studied as a phenomena that is primarily to be studied and analyzed to gain greater knowledge. And this should be contrasted to value narrative creation, like trying to study religion in order to convince others or debunk another religion or do polemics. In the academic study of religion, you try to understand the religion in order to gain a greater knowledge about it and its context and other social phenomena, rather than to create a narrative or create value judgments or arguments against the religion or against other religions. Though there are certain, academic fields and studies that do go, and questions that do kind of go into this about value narrative creation. And you do have the postmodernists that argue that you can't actually avoid it when studying religion, that if you do analyze a religion in a certain way, you will also have an implicit value judgment of that religion if it results in a certain way of viewing the religion. Though I am not entirely convinced of that view. It is a view that exists among certain academics regarding value narrative creation and the idea of studying religion, in that we can't study it without giving value to religion, or rather imposing some values upon the objects we are studying, and our results resulting in something that does give value to value judgments to what we have produced. But generally, the ideal in the academic study of religion is to be non-judgmental towards the material. And this is especially with regards to historical traditions. I am actually not primarily a student of the study of religion. I've just studied a lot within the field of the study of religion because it intersects a lot with my academic studies in history. Because I study a lot of history that involves a lot of uh, religious studies, because I study a lot of history connected to the Islamic fiqh traditions, the Islamic traditions of jurisprudence, and their implications for rulership and for the rights to land usage and the like, which has, made it so that I've been very adjacent in my studies to the academic study of religion. Even if it hasn't been my main field, it has been an important field that I've drawn a lot from. And in history and in a lot of fields of the study of religion, you shouldn't judge the material, you shouldn't judge the religion with value judgments. You should only try to describe it and analyze it in its context. Be descriptive, not prescriptive. Say how it functions or how it is and what it is, rather than saying how it ought to be. An ought is usually a value judgment, as it is something that ought to be, rather than how it is or how it functions. Uh, Again, the academic study of religion has a principle of not seeking true religion, not seeking or defining the true variant of a religion. So, for example, when studying Islam or Christianity or Judaism, which are the religions I'm mostly familiar with, as they are, the ones that I've been mostly concerned with, it hasn't ever been about finding the true faith of Christianity or finding the true variant of Islam or Judaism. It isn't about finding correct religion in the study of religion. Unlike when you are more discussing or debating religion, where in a more everyday sense, where that could be the goal. But it's important here to note that definitions and delineations are still important, because you still need to have some sort of definition about what it is you're studying and what it belongs to and what it does not belong to. So you do have some sort of definitions and defining of a religion, but it isn't in the search of the true variant or the true faith or what God wanted in the academic study of religion. Rather, it is about limiting your study or defining the object of your study, rather than trying to define the true faith or the true religion. Another another very important principle that is reoccurring in the study of religion is actually a sort of, when you do study, especially religion that is, practiced by individuals living right now, is that you should have respect for the privacy and integrity of individuals. So when you do the study of religion, studying, for example, a congregation of people that are practicing right now, there are a lot of rules about how and what you're allowed to do. I will not go into this in any sort of detail here, but there are a lot of principles about things that might be fine to discuss regarding what individuals do in a religion or how they act, but more in a more normal, regular, outside of academia setting, but isn't okay to do in the academic study of religion. Because when you study a religion with practitioners that are living now, and you're studying the practitioners' use of religion or their religious practices, you do have to have a certain amount of respect for their privacy and integrity. So there are actually rules of morals here when you do the study of religion that limit what you are supposed to do and the like, which aren't, imposed in the same way side of academia. Though there are, of course, exceptions to this. You could have, laws about privacy and the like, where you aren't supposed to talk about certain matters or, reveal certain compromising information willy-nilly without any sort of, acceptance or uh, confirmation that it is okay given from the individuals. So there are a lot of rules in the academic study associated with studying religious practices of beliefs right now. Now, studying sources and being critical about them or critical of the individuals found in, for example, historical traditions of religion or in the sources in the religious texts, those things are okay generally in the academic setting. Though it can be in the non-academic setting, criticizing usually the main individuals inside of our religious traditions, the important prophets and the like, are usually very controversial. But in the academic setting, it is actually not that viewed as that important if you're being controversial regarding the religious figures. It's more important that you actually respect in privacy and integrity and moral aspects of now living individuals, which does create these gray zones where you get into people that are involved in new religions, where you might, for example, study a minor religious group where the leader is still living. And, if there are a lot of questions here in the academic study of religion where certain things where you could argue that this person acts in a public way by being the leader of this minor religious group or even this major religious group, but you could also argue that certain boundaries needs to still be set in order to not discuss this person so directly. So there is a lot of these aspects that exist in the academic study that does not exist in more general discussion or debating of religion. It's also that the academic study of religion is also fact seeking, or at least descriptive seeking or explanatory, in a way that discussing or debating religion usually isn't, though it can be. You can discuss and debate facts in order to get into some sort of fact about religion. But generally, it is, academic an academic study of religion is generally seeking to at least describe a religious phenomena rather than to say this is what is right or this is what is wrong, which is prescriptive. It's also, the academic study of religion, unlike more general discussions about religion, is also very focused upon the nature of the material. Is it representative for the religion? Is it representative for believers generally, the thing you're studying here? How limited in its representative nature is it to, a religious tradition or a group? Because you can limit yourself to just wanting to study a minor group. Thus, you limit its representativeness to just being about that group. And you also have discussions in the academic study about, is the material gathered in a correct way? Have this been gathered in an ethical way? There was not any breakage of academic ethical rules in gathering the material. Was the material correctly interpreted? Is there issues with the reliability of the material? Is it problematic in some sort of way that we might need to discuss in an academic, setting with where we discuss the issues of the material not being really reliable in certain ways. And you also have the fact that it could be the academic study is also analytical in greater contexts, in and connected with theoretical frameworks. We usually have theories where we discuss an academic study of religion ought to have a theoretical framework, a theory about something, why something exists, or how you should interpret it and describe something. And there is also, discussion in the academic study of religion where you set up facts which are like the results of your study versus moral considerations of the results. Where, in the academic study of religion, generally you ought to focus upon the facts and how you get to the facts. The methods are the important parts, not what the results of your study is, usually. When it comes to moral considerations. Though there are some contentiousness here because there are, exceptions where you could argue that it is important that the results are not publicized if they, reveal private information or if they are problematic in certain ways. And there are even people that would argue that there does exist rules about respecting general religious worldviews and religious taboos and the like, because otherwise you are not respectful towards that religious tradition. Now, this is also a very contentious topic where you can go either way and argue for, that you shouldn't, study certain things because it will result in, disrespect towards some tradition. I'm more on the side that as long as the methods were correct, as long as the methods were moral in how you gathered information or how you analyzed the information, and that you were firm in your applications of logic and rationality, and and also had good standards of material, then the result and the moral implications aren't that important generally if it doesn't reveal information about a now living person, for example. But generally, as I usually work with old historical text and source texts in the Islamic historical traditions, this is usually not an issue for me, as the people involved there are usually dead, and my judgments about them or my analysis about them are about people that are long gone. But the moral considerations are a lot more important when we discuss religious acts or religious persons that are living or are practiced right now by people. And there is also gray zones here because the teachings of people back in the past and their ideas do still affect people today. But I do think that as long as the people the results are shown about aren't directly living, you shouldn't have moral considerations about publishing the result as long as it was made on good firm grounds with good arguments for the results. And also, the academic study of religion, unlike more general discussions about religion or debates in a non-academic context, focuses upon putting facts in a greater academic context. You do references to other studies and you make connections to other studies within a religious tradition or other studies of a similar phenomena in other religions that have been studied by others. And you also have a review and discussion of results if getting to that stage. If you have produced a thesis and you have written an article, it will get, for example, peer reviewed or get through a revision process where experts will look at it and say that this is good or this is bad, or I don't think that these arguments are convincing due to these reasons, and they will send it back or say you should make this part more firm, and they will come with critique that you have to incorporate or answer. Or you could sometimes, if you aren't getting published in a journal, you could take your study or the results of your article and publish them elsewhere. Sometimes it depends upon the rules associated with the journal and the laws connected to copyright, because sometimes they have in their contracts that if you do hand in a manuscript of an article or the like to a journal, they get the right to the copyright of that article even if they haven't published it. Sometimes they do not get it. If they generally they do not get it if they haven't published it, but it depends very much on the journal. So but generally you sometimes, so sometimes these things can differ, but generally you when you do go through a academic study of religion in academia, or read material of an academic study of religion, know that it has gone through a review and discussion of the results and of the methods used to get to those results, and of the material, which when you discuss generally about something in religion outside of academia, it's usually just you're just discussing a source text or something. You usually are not discussing something that has gone through a process of academic review. Yeah, and that was a part of the presentation. Oh, hello, did you buy this? Hello, 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 did you buy this? Good seeing you here. There is not anyone that wants to post any sort of question. All right, then I will continue on this little bit of it's kind of a messy PowerPoint because I kind of made it quickly, under a couple of, in my free time, because I thought I would have had more time to prepare for this live stream than I actually had. In real life, things came in the way as I worked with this. Yes, didn't know you were doing a stream. Yeah, it's kind of like sometimes it's hard to reach out. I mean, I did make a community post about it, and I do intend for the for future references. By the way, I do intend in the future to make a live stream about once every month or so. So in about 1 month from this live stream, I'm going to make a new live stream. That one will be about history. And then I will, after that one, make a new live stream about 1 month later, and so on and so forth. And hopefully this will be something that will be reoccurring. And I will, post in the community post about a couple of days before when I will be doing these live streams. I will not be able to get set a set date for these live streams because I have in real life commitments, and sometimes things will get in the way and the like. Yeah, no probs, just caught it in time. As for questions, it really depends on the subject matter with me. Yeah, sometimes I've seen, it's the same thing with my videos. I saw sometimes I usually ask people to post questions because I want to make my videos in such a way that I make people think. I want to make people question things, and I want people to get an interest to ask questions in order to broaden their own perspectives on things. And thus I try to encourage them to ask questions. But I've also seen very much that certain subjects are more prone to questions than others. So this is something that uh, I'm very well aware of. That is that's your case here of it really depends on the subject matter. With you, it's something that is generally applicable to YouTube generally, and also my videos generally, even outside of live streams. You will get drastic on next time as well. Get the stream going a bit. Well, I might. I've said, that he's open to join my live streams. Drastic Measures is a guy I've sometimes interactions with on some other Discord channels and on our YouTube channel known as the Gin and Tonic Show, where I usually discuss, in the discussion and debating sense, Islam and things related to Islam. Do I usually also go into a lot of things on that channel about the study of religion and the study of history related to Islam as well? But know that that channel, the Gin and Tonic Show, is kind of like it's discussing and debating Islam from an atheist perspective. So know that what I'm doing there is very different from what I'm doing on this channel. This channel, I will try to focus more upon the study of religion and the study of history. I'm not trying to convince people of some sort of ought on this channel. I'm trying to keep it very neutral and value judgment free on this channel, in contrast to what I'm doing on the Gin and Tonic Show. Though even on the Gin and Tonic Show, I have kind of like gotten a kind of I would say almost reputation for being kind of the devil's advocate there, where I will kind of like argue against some of the most harshest criticism against Islam. But I'm still an atheist, and I still do criticize certain religious traditions within certain groups and certain interpretations of Islam. And also, I do also propose some criticism generally against, theism on that channel. But that channel isn't my main channel. In fact, I've not even have access to that channel. I'm more like a guest on that channel that gets, asked to participate in a lot of the live streams on that channel. But I'm kind of like active there, and Drastic is a guy that is a lot active there as well at times. And I said to him, got to go anyway, Jeannie. Perhaps catch you this Saturday. Yes, I will, if not something comes in the way of either me or the host of the Gin and Tonic Show. I will be there. And be, their guest, ever-present guest host, co-host, kind of. Yeah, Jed Phillips, it's fine to be opinionated when you state that you're giving an opinion in video. I personally have a problem when creators present an opinion that's baked in to their informative content. I agree that this is a major issue where people do kind of bake in opinions and in kind of like a hidden way. Do really depend also upon the opinion. I have, in some cases, you just state an opinion as part of a process of analyzing something. You might say that You might state something because this is what you think happened. This is your, interpretation of the sources. And, in a way, that is still your opinion as what regards to the, matter of fact, or what you see as the most factually correct thing because for example, when you study something in either religion or history, there are sometimes alternative ways to interpret something, but you think that one is better than the other, and then you choose that one and present it as part of information. And it's still, in a way, it's your opinion about what is the most correct thing, what is the most correct analysis of, the material. So in that way, it is an opinion, and it's kind of like baked in because you do not say outright that it's your opinion, but it's still, a kind of like okay sometimes opinion to have in the information, because it's not really so much a value judgment, it's a judgment about what you think is the correct information to give. Worse, do it can certainly lead in certain cases if you do not disclose your, theoretical framework, or you present something that could be very contentious with regards to the true facts as being factually firm, or something that is very easily this way when it is in truth something that could be highly discussable, like many things in history, and you present it like this is 100% pure fact and there is no discussing about this. When you present something in a way that presents it as being stronger than it is, rather than just presenting it as this is what I think is the fact. I will go to your next questions, Jed Phillips. I will also go on here. What I think is worse than giving an opinion when it comes to fact is giving a value judgment opinion. When you are trying to present something as more neutral or objectively based, because value judgments, values about what ought to be or how something is morally, rather than how it functions in society or how something should be described, is a sort of opinion that I've seen baked in, and it's much more problematic because how something ought to be does not necessarily follow from how something is. There is this David Hume, a famous philosopher, actually made a good argument for this, about why just because something is does not automatically give an ought. And that is also why you should avoid value judgments when you make, for example, history, or make a study of religion from a more academic viewpoint. Because when you do that and you begin to add value judgments, you begin to, add something that is entirely of your own creation, because it's an hypothetical ought, or how it ought to have been, or how it should be. It's a subjective value judgment rather than an objective description or attempt at describing something, at least in a much more, you know, non subjective way, or non value judgmental way. I will go on to your next question here. Jed Phillips, what's your favorite and least favorite sect of Islam? Now, this is a value judgment about, it's kind of like also a meta value judgment about what someone values. So this is actually a value opinion. And I will be clear here. I mean, certainly, I do not think, my subjective view, that all of the, subgroups within Islam are equally problematic or something. I do think that some are less problematic. But I mean, in the terms of their effects upon society, and in terms of how they affect, the believers and the non-believers around them. But that is also because that can also be kind of separate from what is your favorite and least favorite sect, because you can even think that's a highly, problematic group within Islam or the like. Might it also be a actually interesting thing to study or look into. So it could be a favorite of mine when it comes to actually studying them as a group. But they aren't my favorite, or consider my favorite when it comes to their implications, when it comes to the effects they have on society. uh I will, in order to not derail this entire live stream too much into a sort of rant about problematic groups that I see from my subjective value judgment, my opinion, I will talk more about what my opinion is regarding studying various groups about Islam. And my favorite, group to study within Islam would probably be classical Shafi'i Sunni, Shafi'i fiqh traditions within Sunni Islam. Because I think that Shafi'ism, as their tradition of Islamic jurisprudence, and especially their their involvement later with integrations from Ash'ari theology and the like, they represent a very interesting kind of like counter movement, or counterweight to the Hanafi Maturidi strain of Sunni Islam. And in many ways, I would also argue that when people talk about classical traditionalist Islam, the Hanbalis that we mostly, and especially the Neo Hanbalis and the Neo Athari Sunnis that we see usually as the kind of stereotypical Salafi, or extremely reactionary Islam right now, they are actually not historically the traditionalists within Islam. I would say that that title historically actually goes to the Shafi'i madhab and the followers of Shafi'i fiqh within Sunni Islam, and that tradition historically. And I think that it has had a very historically, not only if you go back to the Mamluk state where it was important, but even during the Abbasid times, the Shafi'i tradition acted very much as a counterweight, as kind of like the the primary group representing the the tradition of the traditionalist and of the learned men of religion, versus the Hanafi tradition of jurisprudence, that was more the tradition that was more, I wouldn't say that it was always following in the footsteps of the caliph, the Abbasid caliph's judgments, nor would I say that it did that either during the Ottoman times, but it was more the jurisprudence enforced by the centralized rulership. In contrast, the Shafi traditions of jurisprudence and of ideas about Islam and the practical traditions of Islam more represents the tradition of the decentralized, strong, uh, strong class of learned men of religion, standing in contrast to the centralized authority of the caliph. And there is a lot of interesting relations here to power dynamics and centralization versus decentralization, and institutionalization versus personal centralized charisma in the caliph, that I think that the Shafi'is jurisprudence and their theological traditions actually evolved a lot in order to justify the elite status of the learned men of religion and of tradition versus the radicalism and centralization and centralized authoritarianism of the the caliph. Uh, that makes the Shafi'i tradition my favorite tradition to, study historically. And a least favorite sect of Islam to study. I would say when it comes to studying, uh, I mean, the, I mean, it's hard because it would either be one of the more minor subgroups within Shia Islam, because I mostly focused in my academic study on Sunni Islam. Though I have done a lot of studies about Shia Islam in my free time, and I've also dedicated a lot of videos here on this channel to, subjects related to Shia Islam because I wanted to do something else on my free time and on my videos because I make videos because I think it's fun, because I like to, inform people about various things. And I also like to study new things. So I do, these videos in my free time. And since I study Sunni Islam kind of like as part of my regular studies in real life, I want to go into Shia Islam more on this channel as kind of like something new, to not do the same thing in real life as I do on this channel, because otherwise it gets kind of boring. So I would say, but some of the more minor sects of Shia Islam are actually very hard to study. Most Alis, for example, which are a Sevener Shia sect of Ismaili, a sect of Ismaili Islam, are kind of like hard to get into. I do, uh, then there is also, but then when it comes to more of my in real life studies, a group I've always had issues studying because they are so, not only are they a widespread large tradition, but they are so different locally and in so many different strains. It's actually the Maliki madhab of within Sunni Islam, the Maliki madhab of fiqh, of jurisprudence, because they aren't actually one tradition. They all share that they come from, Imam Maliki originally, but they develop in very different lines, in very different traditions. So I've always had an issue going into them because it's not one tradition, it's a name for several related traditions that are widely different from each other. And they are kind of like hard to get into and hard to actually study historically, because not only are they very localized, you have local variants all over the place. They sometimes also take a lot of influence from other traditions. So you see cross references to the Hanafis, you see references to the Shafis, even the Hanbalis and the Dahiri school as well. And so they aren't like this very, long tradition of consensus and tradition like you see in the Shafi'i tradition. Rather, they are very much a chaotic, mess, which makes them hard to study and get into. And it also means that when once you study one tradition of the Maliki school, you will not get an easy access to other traditions within the Maliki school. Which is kind of like unlike in the Shafi tradition. Once you begin to study certain key figures there, you will kind of like get a greater understanding for the whole. The Shafi'i tradition is in that way easier. It's complex in its own ways. It's not easy to, say, to say that the Shafi'i tradition is simpler, but it's kind of like it's more standardized in a way. And it's an easier tradition to study, and thus I like it more. And it's also a much more coherent tradition in the way that it has much more consistent effects upon history due to being a more coherent tradition that I find makes the Shafi'i tradition within Sunni Islam much more interesting. So that would be my most favorite would be the Shafi'i tradition within Sunni Islam, and my least favorite would be the Maliki tradition within Sunni Islam, and some of the minor Ismaili traditions such as the Mustalis. Uh, Now I will go to the next mystical order of Israel. The best sect of Islam for me to study are the Ismailis, also the Druzim. Yeah, the Druze. Uh, they, I mean, the Ismailis are an interesting group. I'm mostly familiar with the Nizaris, which is another Ismaili subgroups. Ismaili subgroup, because the Ismailis aren't just one group; they are several within Shia Islam. You have Nizari, you have Mustali, and you have several Bohras, which are like subsects within Mustali. Shia Ismaili Islam, and they are certainly an interesting counter movement, especially also when you go in when they once they were the dominant strain of Islam during the Fatimid era, where arguably Ismailism was the dominant strain of Islam. It was definitely back then the dominant strain of Shia Islam. Actually, Twelvers being as dominant as they are now is mostly due to the Safavids and dynasty of the Iranian Persians, a Turkish dynasty that took control over the area that is modern day Iran and Iraq, and some of the territories to the east of Iran in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they kind of converted a lot of the population from Sunni Islam, which had been a dominant Islamic subgroup in Iran, and they converted them to 12er Shia Islam. And they also converted a lot of the other Shia minorities that existed there, that were mostly Zaydi and Ismaili, to 12er Islam also. Now I will look upon the next comment. The Karmatia are the most interesting, especially destroying the Kaaba. The Karmatians, or the Karamita, are kind of like they are an interesting group, though it's kind of like hard to actually get some sort of good view about what they actually fought. They were an early Ismaili subsect. The problem is that there are so many sources about them that are contradictory, but also obviously biased against them, which means that we do not know that much about them. There are even, accusations of them being Zoroastrians rather than Muslims, but that idea I will, just discard outright, because the coins that they actually produced are clearly Islamic. They reference the Quran constantly, and what's their ideas about destroying the Kaaba is something that is not entirely unique to them, because there are certain other radical groups in the history of Islam that have, or Islam in Islamicate history, that have actually wanted to destroy the Kaaba too because they think that it's associated with polytheism and worship of idols and the like. It's a radical fringe view, but it's a radical fringe view that has reoccurred in history at certain times. There existed, for example, in the medieval period, radical Maturidi Hanafis that wanted to destroy the Kaaba. There were certain sects of there was this Sufi order as well within that was an you know Hanbali order that wanted to do that as well. If I'm not entirely wrong in my memory, there there have been in short there have been a lot of groups that have had views that are similar to the Carmatians, but that came afterwards. So, I mean, just that they had that view about the Kaaba, I don't think is a great indication because sometimes it's used as an indication that they weren't Muslims, but they were certainly some sort of Islamic sect, a very radical, extreme one that had fringe views, but have they certainly are they are interesting, but it's hard to know what they really stood for due to the biases found in the sources. Uh, Next, I love that Ismailis teach about Tanzug, Islamic reincarnation, Sudo Druzim. I mean, there are groups within Ismaili Islam isn't one group, and I actually know a guy that has tried to do dawa or tried to convert me. He's kind of my friend, and sometimes we discuss, religion generally in everyday life. Kind of like he's a very, strongly believing Nizari Ismaili Muslim, and I don't think that the Nizaris actually do believe in reincarnation. I do think it's only the Druze that does that. I will have to ask him about this because this is not something I'm that certain about. I hate the Zaydis, especially how they treat the Jews and still have Jews imprisoned in Yemen that didn't do Aliyah to Aretz Yisrael. I mean, isn't I mean, I will not tell you what you should feel or something like that because my channel is not about preaching a certain viewpoint or how you ought to view the world. But I will say this that I personally do not think that all Zaydis should be to blame for how certain Zaydis act. And it's the same as you should not blame all the Christians or blame all the Jews for what certain individuals have done. You can still discuss theological viewpoints as being wrong or right or think that ideas are bad, but we shouldn't blame an entire group for certain individuals or certain politics made by certain individuals. In my opinion, I'm open for you disagreeing with me on this, but I will say to you that you might, and I say this with the utmost respect for your uh, right to have your own opinion, that my is saying that you hate the Zaydis for what a couple of Zaydis or what certain political leaders have done is not what I would consider a good principle. or what we ought to, have as a view. I try to be, separate, ideas and the practices of certain individuals from the group, because I think that once we begin to talk about groups as being all responsible for actions, though there are, of course, gray zones here where you could say that certain ideas do influence people, and I do agree that ideas do influence people to make certain decisions. All right, you specify the Saudis in power, the Houthis. Uh, Fair enough. I can understand that. I can understand that you have issues with them and their actions. Now you have delimited it into a very specific group where you could argue that it does apply to the group rather than just a very generalized the Zaydis. So yes, I agree with you that the Houthis. I mean, discussing the Houthis. They are actually a lot more complex than, you know due to the situation in Yemen. It's a very complex situation there, where the Houthis, I would argue, are actually more of a result of localized politics than just, fringe radicals being, extreme towards everyone. Even if they are viewed as that from the outside, they are very much a result of local conditions, and they are also a lot more on the ground, a lot more flexible and, connected to local conditions rather than just being dogmatic extremists than most people would think. Discussing the Houthis would take hours because it's a very complex situation in Yemen. But I can understand now that you meant only them as a group. Sorry, I'm being a little bit rambling on. Also in past history as well, the Mausa exile. Yeah. You had another question here where that I will probably go on to answer here. What is your thoughts on the true history of the Kaaba? Uh, I mean, I will be clear here. I do not believe in Islam, and I do not believe in the divine origin or the religious, you know, narrative about the Kaaba being, erected by Abraham, or what was it, Ismail? I think it was Abraham, and then being taken over by the polytheists, and then being brought back to true religion, to true Islam, as related in the classical Islamic narrative. I believe that the black rock inside of it that came from the sky probably was a sort of normal natural meteorite that became worshipped in local religious traditions, and then when Muhammad you know began to get I began his religion, he incorporated a lot of local practices, like you know keeping the stone as an holy object, together with a lot of traditions from Christianity and Judaism, and mixed them together, and the Kaaba just continued to be a holy site, but now for a monotheistic religion rather than a polytheistic religion. And I do think it's just a natural evolution of the rule of the Kaaba from a historical standpoint, that it was just something that was worshipped before, and continued to be not worshipped, but used as a important part of religion, because Though the borders between worship, idol worship, and you know using something as part of religion is blurred. This was kind of like the arguments in a lot of the anti-Kaaba sects within Islam, of the groups that have been against the Kaaba, in that they say that, oh, but polytheists that use idols, they say that they don't worship the idols, they only use them in rituals to their gods. Or how Christians use crosses in order to get close to God. They do not worship the cross, and thus they are, but they are still committing shirk, and thus they use the same argument against going to the Kaaba. uh, but I would say that Muslims do not worship the stone, and neither do Christians worship the cross or do something. They just use them as a kind of instrument to get closer to God. Oh, here is drastic measures. Hey Jeannie, hope the live stream has been going well. Oh, it has been going well. And it is going well. I'm currently in the middle of interacting with my viewers, like you that just jumped in. I'm also or also by my viewers, this is the drastic that I referenced before in my previous, previously here in the live stream, when I was going through a bit of the presentation, and then the dude about this jumped in and asked about drastic, and I said that he might come because I said to him that I would have a live stream here. The drastic measures is an atheist that makes, would I describe it as polemical videos discussing with various Muslim preachers and the like, or rather making commentary on videos and the like. And he's kind of like, if I was the nice in, for example, he has been active on the gin and tonic shows. I make critical videos on the most popular Dawa apologists. Yes, that's a good summation of what you do. And his videos and his channel can kind of like be summarized by that. He does it from an atheist standpoint and atheist secularist standpoint. For the most part, I do videos on Islam in general. Yes. And you have also been kind of like active on the gin and tonic show, where I have also been a guest and you have been, where you and some of the other guests and hosts there have kind of like been the bad cop to my nice cop routine, because generally I'm kind of like being sometimes the devil's advocate on that show, because you do not get many Muslim viewers and Muslim guests, and thus I kind of like act as the defendant of Islam. Anyway, now I should go back to the questions. Omar El Morsi. Despite Safavids making a golden age of Persian culture, they pretty much ruined Iran, making it hostile towards other Muslim countries and giving clergy more authority and titles. I would argue that I would not say that they ruined Iran. I would say that they certainly made Iran stick out for better, worse religiously. And they certainly did, in certain ways, lay the groundwork for what later developed. But actually, early Safavid theological traditions about, Islam was that actually the clergy had actually pretty limited power. The power of the religious tradition in the 12-hour Islam that was actually preached by the Safavids was actually a religious tradition that gave a lot of power to the earthly rulership rather than to the clergy. I would say actually that you know it wasn't the Safavids that made these jumps or these made this tendency towards greater power of the clergy. I would say that that's happened due to theological traditions that began during the Afsharid dynasty. Yeah, but yes, but this is true. But I would more attribute that to actually the Afsharids and what developed during their reign. So it's actually later after the Safavids. I would say that the Safavids version of 12 Shia Islam, or the version that was promoted, was actually very similar in certain regards to the Hanafi Maturidi traditions that had developed in the Ottoman, in the Ottoman Sultanate. So I would say that it wasn't the Safavids, it was the Afsharids, a later dynasty. And thank you, Drastic Measures. Maybe I will talk with you on Discord after this stream. I will continue for maybe an hour or so more. Now, there was one other questions. Also, on thoughts of Caliph Abdul Malik putting the final form of the Quran together. I do think that Abdul Malik actually did do some sort of canonization, and that there is probably, at least we can't say conclusively if there was, if the narrative about Omar and Uthman putting the final Quran together is correct or not correct. There are some arguments in that direction that could be made. But there are also arguments that it was standardized and canonized later under Caliph Abdul Malik. Personally, I do think that the Caliph Abdul Malik actually did have at least partially a hand in some sort of maybe a revision of the Quran, maybe, but I'm not totally 100% convinced of this. And the discussion about the canonization process of the Quran is actually quite complex, and there are a lot of considerations. As I do not believe in the Islamic narrative, I don't believe that the book was, or the recitation was ever divinely protected. But I do think that, considering that a lot of the early Quran manuscripts that we actually do have are very similar to the standardized Quran of today. Sure, there are in the pre-Abdul Malik Quran manuscripts always differences from the standard Quran in one way or the other. They are mostly minor differences, and and most of the texts, the majority of the texts, are the same as the Quran, which indicates that even if Abdul Malik did do some sort of final form of the Quran, most of the Quran at least existed in early time, very early, and was, if not, preserved, at least known. A lot of the Quran was at least known and had at least been, in circulation in a form that was similar to what is the standard Quran of today. That's on skeptics saying Muhammad and Mecca is made up like J. Smith and Robert Spencer? I have actually not listened to their specific arguments, but they usually borrow or take arguments made from skeptical traditions within the study of religion or the history of the Middle East, studies of the history of Middle East, and they usually either take the most extreme positions found there and just copy them generally. I'm just saying, speaking generally about what I think that they have done here because I haven't seen their arguments, so I might be totally wrong here. But the idea that Muhammad or Mecca is made up is usually connected to the thing that we do not have good evidence for Mecca existing before the time of Islamic traditions. They usually say, I would argue that we have a lot of the circumstantial evidence that actually point towards at least Mecca existing as a city, because it would be hard to make Mecca up as a city coming from nowhere. Mecca is actually named by a different name in the Quran as well. It's not only Mecca, it's also Becca. And the city of Jeddah, which is a city very close to it, does not really make sense as a great harbor city if there is not another great city nearby like Mecca. And Jeddah, we do know that it had a different name in the past with the consonants meme, noon, long while, and a hamza sound, a short glottal stop. And we do know that the so we do know that there did exist cities in the area, and that they changed names, and the same could have been applied to Mecca, because a recurring argument is that Mecca is not mentioned by name until after the Islamic conquest by the name Mecca. But also the name Mecca itself is actually also a shortening of Old Arabic Mamaka, which is the drinking place or the place where you take water. So it's a very generic name as well that could be applied to a lot of places. And we do know also that Mecca strategically also have a very important position geostrategically, in that it does have water. The Zemzem well, the famous drinking well of Mecca, takes its water from large underwater reservoirs that have been used, at least in the medieval past, to actually water the area. Because we do know that from medieval manuscripts that Mecca did have tens of thousands of inhabitants, and it wouldn't be impossible that it was a major city even before Islam. It was the Qajars, not the Afsharids. Nadar actually tried to strip clergy from their authority, and even proposed to Ottoman Caliph to have Jafari accepted as a fifth madhab in Islam. Yeah, that might be. Yes, it's probably the Qajars. I might have, mixed them up. Sorry. This is kind of like my specialty generally is medieval history, so I mix up, and it's Arabic medieval history, so sometimes I mix up later Persian history. So sorry, yeah. Ugh. I mixed the places. The Afsharids were before the Qajars. Yeah. Ugh. Ugh. Sorry. I switched the place because I first was it was the you know Qajars and then the Afsharids. Ugh. Yeah, you're right. It was probably during the Qajar dynasty that it happened. Uh, so yeah, Omar Al Mursi. But it was, but at least my point stands. at least 95% sure that it didn't begin during the Safavids. And if it began during them, it was definitely at the end, because early on they were definitely having a theology that even took a lot of the inspirations from Maturidism, more specifically the strain that actually got adopted in the Ottoman Empire, because they argue that, it's the results of the rulers that determine true legitimacy rather than relations to the, prophet's family or greater, claim of religious praxis. And the good Islamic ruler is the one that rules justly and is the good gardener of the garden. They usually, both the Ottomans and the Safavids, use this metaphor of the ruler being a gardener and keeping a beautiful garden. That is kind of like central to their arguments of authority, because it's much more important that you keep the garden clean and beautiful than it follows standardized ideas about what is in the garden. If you do not keep the garden beautiful, if you do not take away all of the vegetation that should not be there, and take away all of the what's it called in English, in English, the term for weeds that ought to not be there. Oh, hello there, the historiographer. I'm glad having you here. We are currently discussing everything from history and history connected to religion. We began by me doing kind of like a PowerPoint on religion and the study of religion, and then it kind of got derailed. But I'm fine with having things derailed on this live stream. I like more to interact with you during these live streams. These live streams exist solely to interact with you, my viewers, and followers, subscribers. It's much more about the interaction on these live streams than it is about actually presenting a thing. Also, before this storygraph, we had the mystical order of Israel said, I just find it interesting that many aspects of the Quran comes from Midrashim Syriac texts like the Seven Sleepers and the legend of Alexandria, the legend of Alexander, also the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Yes, I think that this actually does point to. I mean, these things could have gotten into it in several ways, but I do think that Islam, because I'm viewing Islam, I'm not. I'm just studying now as an outside phenomena, since I'm not a believing Muslim. I would say that Islam actually evolved from a, Muhammad, or if there were other people involved, took a lot of influences and ideas from both Christianity, Judaism, and also local practices, and mixed them together and took influences when they created Islam, or when the holy texts were kind of like made, or when the traditions found in the Quran and later also written down in the Sunnah were probably, derived from earlier traditions. I actually think that a lot of the very interesting stuff that can be found to probably be in the substrate or in the background that the Islamic traditions took from actually were taken from the Ethiopic Christian tradition, their Miaphysite orthopractical traditions, because I do think that there are certain similarities there that I can at least notice. I believe the Jewish, the use of the use of himyar played a big role in the formations of Islam, because I think that you meant the Jews, not the Jewish. the Himyar were a dynasty that were active in what is modern day Yemen, a pre-Islamic dynasty that converted to Judaism, and then they later it was a kingdom. Yeah, the Jewish kingdom. Or all right, the Jewish kingdom of Himyar. Yes, they were a kingdom in what is modern day Yemen, and sure, they were probably also a great influence, and they were probably also the result of there already being a large Jewish, Jewish minority, or at least Jewish group there. They might have even been a majority locally in certain areas. Because we do know that Ethiopia, on the other side of the Red Sea, had areas that were not only had they large sub, groups of Jews, they had areas where Jews were in clearly the majority. Some have even theorized that during the Aksumite Empire, as much as maybe a third of the Aksumite Empire might have been Jews of the population. So if that was the case on the other side of the Red Sea, then it is not beyond thinking that the case was also the same in southern Arabia. Also, Joseph Dunwas was a cousin of the exiliarchs of Bavimar Sutra from the Davidic bloodline. Yes, I think I've heard of this before. I'm not that knowledgeable in this. I've so that I can discuss this in great detail or with great confidence. But I do think that these kind of claims are kind of more mythological or kind of like legendary, claims, like stories attributed to certain peoples in order to grant legitimacy rather than true historical fact. But yeah, but they certainly they. I mean, a lot of these, Jewish kingdoms and Jewish political entities have historically tried to connect a lot to previous Jewish traditions. I mean, also Christian, entities like the, Aksumite Empire, as I spoke about before, try to connect a lot to, Jewish tradition, and they did draw a lot of their, you know, legal Christian traditions because the Aksumite Church, what would later become the Ethiopic Tawahidu Orthodox Oriental Miaphysite Church, have their legal traditions, their Christian jurisprudence that they funnily enough also use the word kanun for. That they derived from a lot from Jewish traditions and Jewish jurisprudence and of halacha, of the Jewish holy law. They kind of because their holy law is kind of like just a continuation of that, but in a Christian way. So that also happened within Christian kingdoms. So it wasn't just Jews. And the Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty also claimed direct descent from, Solomon and, the Queen of Sheba. We can discuss, the legitimacy of that myth or the like, but, I mean, hey Genie, Dress Measure Islam channel on top is full of anti-Islamic clickbait. I mean, I'm not saying that I agree with everything he has on his channel or that I think that everything he has is wrong. It's very much a case on case basis. And he's, a guy that I consider a friend and that I do interact with, even if we do have sometimes disagreements about certain matters. And because I like being, open minded, I like having actually contacts with people that I do disagree with, and have interactions with people all over. Uh, so I'm just saying that he has a channel that is very critical of Islam, and you could call it anti-Islamic clickbait, or wrong or right. I don't. I think that sometimes he is very right. Sometimes he does things that I disagree with. I mean, I just said that he was a close friend. It's and contact with me. I will now continue on to the next question. What made Sufism so popular and influential during the 13th to the 16th centuries? Was the damage that Islamic world during the Mongol invasion and Timurid invasion the reason of it? Like trauma and ignorance? Uh, I think it was less the damage, and I think it was much more that Sufism was heavily promoted by the Seljuks. And then it remained and also got continued by the later Mongols and their descendant lines. It was because, but you also see similar developments also in the Western Maghrib world that wasn't under, you know, Turkic or Mongol invasions, and so it kind of like seems to have been a general tendency. Yes, the Kabra Nagust was written in the 14th century, and there was no Solomonic dynasty of Aksum before that. Yes, this is correct. I don't think I claimed something contrary to that. I just mentioned the Solomonic dynasty as an example of a later dynasty that did that, but I can mention them in the same breath as the Aksumite Empire. So it ought to be clarified here that their creation of the claim of legitimacy through claiming to be of the Solomonic dynasty and of the same line of rulers as the Aksumite empires is similar to how other entities have done it before, how other Jewish entities have done it. So I just wanted to take the Solomonic dynasty as an example, and the Aksumite empire that didn't claim Solomonic descent. As clearly, there are certain indications because there are certain coins that indicate that they may that where they kind of like claim to be of the house of David, which could be an indication of being of the descent of Solomon, rather than being descended from kind of like some sort of general Jewish descent among the Aksumite kings. So it might have not been an entirely new idea. There is a bit of discussion that could be had about this claim and this myth that I'm not going to go into detail with right now. Yeah. Oh, right. Yes, I answered this, but that Sufism was just a general. Sufism was popular due to the Turkic dynasties. Yes, that is my argument, at least in the Mashriq region. But the interesting thing is that you're already seeing this happen before in the Maghrib region, in the 10th and the 11th centuries. Arguably, this is where Sufism begins to get really strong. So it's hard if this is. I mean, sometimes something that happens on a greater civilizational scale does not happen just because of one reason. It happens due to several reasons. Uh, yeah, the Almohads, they are the Almowahidun, right? Yes, yeah, yeah. Oof. Sometimes I'm, oof. And then the Almorabitun is the Almoravids. Yes. Uh, sorry. Sometimes I'm so used to actually seeing the things in Arabic that I sometimes forgot get the English names for some of these groups and dynasties, and they spawned due to the reason of fending off the Reconquista of the Reconquista being the attempt by the various Christian entities to take over the Iberian Peninsula that was under the control of the you know uh, we mix up between both two. Yeah. Sometimes it gets confusing because one name in English and then representing one, and then sometimes it just what was it the one corresponding to the other one in English. Ugh. But anyway, I would say that I mean it's partially that I would say that the Almohads, are spawned partially due to the Reconquista, the attempt by the Christians to take over the Islamic Iberian Peninsula under Islamicate rule, Al Andalus. But I would also say that it is also partially a response due to various internal, developments. I mean, they did not begin in Spain. They did begin in North Africa, where they began, but they got fueled certainly by what happened in Spain, which was part of the entire Maghreb region, the entire Western Arab world back then, or Arabic Islamicate speaking world. Though most of the Almohadun were actually Berbers, but yeah, and they were also surprisingly, in many regards, they were actually pretty, different when you begin to read about them from many other dynasties from their time, and especially their radicalism in their religiousness, where they're kind of like, for being such radical extremists that they are often sometimes portrayed in later, they were actually rather tolerant and rather lax in a lot of matters that more later Islamic thinkers would have thought would have been preposterous to be lax about, regarding, for example, attributions to God, ideas about God's attributes, and also the prayer direction. They didn't actually think that you needed to pray in the direction of the Qibla, of the direction of Mecca, to actually have a legitimate prayer. So they actually, if you can look at old mosques built by both the Almorabitun, the Almoravids, and the Almohidun, the Almohads, and you can actually notice that their minarets, the towers that where you call to prayers, and the directions of the mosques aren't actually facing Mecca at all. They did have some strange stuff, having even some Shia influences from the Fatimids. They did actually have a lot of Shia influences and Shia theology into their thinking as well, but they were also the reason as to why Shiism died out in the Maghreb region, because they were very brutal towards Shia groups. They more or less eradicated the Zaydis and the a lot of the other groups there as well. And I mean, the Fatimids began also in north Western Africa, in the area of Algeria and Tunisia, where they had their Berber allies. Uh, what was the Berber group? Where was it? The Kutuma. Uh, that they utilized the Fatimids usually relied upon. Uh, yeah, yep. The eradication is a small word. Yeah, they. I am going to go through that part of history in some sort of future video. It is on my list. Though my to-do list on videos to do is currently, it's going to take a while until I get to it. I have a to-do list for several years in the future of videos. But I mean, sometimes I do make videos of things on that list that are far down on it because I just think that it's would be something that would be more interesting to do, and thus, even if it is far far on the end of that list, it can sometimes appear far earlier than its placement on that list. I do not follow the list always in order. But yes, it is on my list to actually also discuss this matter. Uh, the Fatimids are underrated. Al-Mahdi and Tunis was founded by Sikili, the Fatimid commander. Yes, the Fatimids are severely underrated. I mean, generally, the Egyptian history where the Fatimids, after the conquest of Egypt, where they are really, at their strongest, it's generally very underrated. I mean, Egyptian history, especially in the Western world, is mostly just pre-Islamic history. And maybe they mentioned Saladin, but that's it. But uh, and the Fatimids are not only being underrated due to being part of a generally a part of history that is underrated, and that is post is Islamic Arabic invasion of Egypt history, but also they are underrated due to the very fact that they due to being Ismaili Shia rather than a Sunni dynasty in Arabic historical traditions. They have been kind of like underrated just due to the fact that they are a Shia dynasty rather than a Sunni dynasty like the Abbasids. So and there has been also a lot of what I would call Salahuddin eradicated them. Ironically, I mean he took them over in a coup, but I mean he replaced them. Yes, though the really big eradication of Ismaili Shia Islam from Egypt, I would say, actually occurred during the Mamluk period. And the Mamluk, what I would call almost the Mamluk inquisitorial age, or the Mamluk age of persecution, because they had a period in the 13th to 14th century where they became very brutal towards any sort of Muslim minority that wasn't a Shafi'i Sunni Muslims. Even other Sunni Muslims were persecuted during that period. I mean, even Ibn Taymiyyah, the famous or infamous, depending upon how you argue about him, Hanbali scholar and Hanbali thinker, was condemned to death in an official statement made by the Mamluk ulama during that age, which is also one of the reasons I would argue is why he is so radical. So there is a lot of the Mamluks were indeed very, very zealous about Sunnism, taking over the Abbasid Caliph in Cairo. Yes, they were. They weren't only zealous about Sunnism. That is far too broad. They were very zealous about their very specific brand of Sunni Islam. Though arguably you had similar things happening during the later Ottomans too, but not to the same extent, I would argue. But the Mamluks were very, very zealous generally about their version of Sunni Islam. which also meant that they actually did get into conflict with a lot of other Sunni groups. And my previously mentioned example of Ibn Taymiyyah was just one example of many that got into issues with the Mamluk authorities, the Mamluk religious authorities during this period. And I mean, maybe I should go. If this was, I've talked a lot about questions, and we have been a little bit of going on the, a sidetrack. We were discussing religion, so maybe I should go back to the presentation, uh, where I discussed the study of religion as, contrasting to just generally discussing and debating religion. Before we went through studying religion, how it connect to ethic and emic perspectives, outside and inside perspectives, some of the principles of studying religion that differs from, for example, discussing and debating religion and what is focused upon. Now I will say towards, the study of religion can also, unlike generally discussing religion or debating religion when you talk more everyday religion, is that the study of religion is also subdivided in disciplines in a way that most discussions and debates of religion are not. You have, for example, the study of religious psychology, which is, studying religion from a psychological perspective with psychological analysis, focusing on the effects of religion on the mind, on relationship building in connection to religion, and group psychology about how, groups in religions act and how it affects your, beliefs, and how, groups are formed through religion, or maintain group cohesion, or maintain relationships through religion. There is a lot of stuff within religious psychology. This is a field I have not been that into, because I've been into other things when it comes to the study of religion. Because, again, the study of religion has not been my main field or my main subject. It has been history, where I've used, material from academic studies of religion in my work generally. So this isn't my main field, and religious psychology has never been a major part of that. There is also anthropological studies, which is observed culture and practices in connection to religion. Here, emic methods, which are emic is inside perspective methods, are usually a large part of this, where you go into various groups and try to kind of like act as part of that group, or you're observing them from inside the group rather than describing them and observing them from the outside using text. Here you participate, and you also look at other participants in the culture and in the religion, and analyze, the religion as, a group of observed practices, traditions, and aspects of culture. Usually, these kind of studies also connect into greater studies about a culture, or, area or group, because religion is part of, greater culture. And, these parts also interact with greater culture as well, and, cultural practices. Then you have history of religion, which is, the focus upon changes in our religion and practices and religious impact on history. This is what I mostly focused upon, because I'm interested in, changes in religion, here specifically in the Islamic traditions I'm mostly focused upon, and their impact on history in how, for example, religion has been used to justify or delegitimize various claims to power or ideas and concepts connected to power and connected to, for example, land usage rights or material things. Because religion is a very important factor in the development of history, in human culture, and in human interaction, and has always been connected strongly to social developments and to, power and happenings. You also have philosophy of religion, which is the studying or analyzing of theology and its thinking, and of how people think about religion and how they justify things regarding religion, and how you can argue in relation to religion. This field sometimes does have uh, aspects of judgment, of value judgment. This is one of the fields where value judgments and discussions about values and morals and subjective value judgments is usually included, because a lot of theological thinking is connected to ethics and actions and beliefs of what ought to be. And sometimes you also have parts of the study of the philosophy of religion where you make counterclaims, or you make statements in relation to these matters, where you do become a subjective judge of matters, or you involve value judgments in your analyzing and theoretical framework when you do a study within the field of the philosophy of religion. You also have philology, which is the studying and restoring of religious texts and other historic texts, and the study of their origins. This is kind of like, this is connected very heavily with the history of religion, and you could say that it's a subdivision of the history of religion, but it also is more focused upon text restoration and you know how you can interpret various texts and how you can find versions of texts and explain their origins and their interpretations in a very in context. It has very much to do with text preparation. This same field exists in history generally as well, where you know try to restore a text or try to argue for which version of a text is the original, or how it ought to be interpreted. What is the true meaning behind the words in a text? You usually make edited versions where you argue for various interpretations of a text and their meanings in a text in this field. Then you have discord analysis, which is also an approach in the study of religion, where you're studying how religions is or are used and portrayed in discourses, or argued for or against in media and politics. This is very much, or how religions, are used to argue various arguments, how they are used in discussions. This is like very focused upon how people discuss or argue about religion. And then you have comparative religion, which looks at the similarities and differences between religious traditions. Here you do various studies of, comparison, where you try to look at similarities or differences and argue and analyze them between various religious traditions. Comparative religion can be within the same religion. It is, you can, for example, compare an older religious tradition to a newer religious tradition within the same religion, or two different religious traditions within the same religion. For example, comparing some sort of theological thinking in Shia Islam with Sunni Islam, or you could also do comparison between how people pray within various subdivisions of our religion and the like, or between entirely different religious traditions. You can find pretty interesting similarities and differences if you, for example, would compare Islam to, for example, Hinduism, two very different religions with entirely different worldviews, but you in certain aspects you could compare certain aspects and find similarities or stark differences and organ and analyze why they appear or why they don't appear as the same. But these are the general approaches or fields of study within the study of religion, generally. Uh, uh, all right, the historiographer. Take care. Zaid Atimash asked, "What religious traditions do you follow?" I actually do not follow any religious tradition. I am actually an atheist. Though, depending upon how you define religion, you could argue that an atheist will, by definition, also be religious. But I actually do not follow, and any, traditional religious tradition, as I do not believe in the existence of a god or any sort of supernatural reality, or anything that in most classical senses would be considered a religion. Though you could certainly argue that, since I do believe that there does exist certain things about the world, and I do have kind of a integrated worldview where I try to see the world as being a result of, I wouldn't say a greater power, but I do think that the world as it exists is kind of like the result of a process of causality where everything is interconnected. I do think that if you could know all the rules about the universe, you could eventually actually figure out what everything is going to happen, because everything is interconnected in a way. This does not mean that everything is the same thing. I do not believe that everything is interconnected by a great spirit, but I do think that everything is interconnected in that everything is connected to causality, and everything that happens due to a reason, due to something that happened before, due to very complex rules governing reality, going back to some sort of pre-universal rule about the universe. And in that sense, you could argue that I am religious in a sense. I'm just not classically religious. And now maybe I should go on to the next, because the PowerPoint is kind of like, I'm getting kind of like sidelined by these side comments, but I love you for them. Continue to do that, because I love interacting with you with these side comments and side questions. Uh, now, now we should maybe go on to the next, which is the big questions of the study of religion. Now I'm saying the big questions here of the study of religion, because these are questions that you can't answer easily, and you can't even write a thesis, ending them. These are questions that lie behind any sort of study of religion, and these are assumptions that are discussed within the study of religion generally when we discuss it academically. These are assumptions that are mostly not considered very much when we discuss religion in a more ordinary discussion or in a debate way that much. We do not have them back in our minds, but these are important to have in your mind when you discuss religion academically, generally. And that is kind of like the questions that define how you study religion and what you think about religion. First, what is religion? It's a very important question. How do you define it? These are the kind of like meta-theoretical questions we need to ask when we study a religion. What is religion? How can I study it? What is it is? And various studies of religion will have various definitions of religion that affect of, what they study and what they, you know, think is a religious phenomena or not. Those that study religion will have to ask these meta theoretical questions before they study religion, because they kind of like affect greatly what you study and how you study it. And then there are questions about, does there exist such a thing, such as a universal religion? Are all religions and traditions the same fundamentally? Can we actually talk about universal religion as something that all the things that we usually call religion have in common? I mean, here I do think that there are things that universally bind a lot of religions together. But I also think that you could also argue that most religious traditions should be seen as separate traditions. They shouldn't be seen as a result of some sort of universal religious nature in humanity, some sort of religious aspect of humanity. But with these assumptions about universal religion, these will affect how you judge what to study or not. Those that want to find, for example, universal religion will usually study similarities in comparative studies of religion, where they compare religions and they try to find similarities and argue that these are going back to some sort of universal religion or universal understanding of religion, something that is universal to religion. Whereas people that reject the idea about universal religion and think that there does not exist universal religion will instead argue that religions are different, and they will try to find differences or say that comparison is not even possible at all, since you're not comparing things that are comparable, since various religions are fundamentally different with this view or this question about how you see universal religion. And then there is the question about religion's role in society. Where does it end? Where does religion end or go into other fields? Where are you stopping but doing the study of religion and doing the study of something else? I mentioned before how my main field of study isn't the study of religion, it is history. But I've, usually gone into the study of religion and taken, influence from the studies of religion and various, academic studies in religion in order to, argue things in history, because my field was very closely connected to it, connected to religion. And this is something that is important when you do a study of religion that most people do not think about when discussing religion generally. It is, where does religion end or where does it begin, and are we discussing religion and not something else that is connected to religion? And when do we go from discussing, for example, religion into discussing politics, where it is no longer a discussion really about the religion, but really about some sort of political issue instead, where the connection to the religion is more that it argues for this or it is connected to some sort of viewpoint in this. Then you have the view of the source versus practice in religion. What is the important part in a religion? Should we look at what the sources say about religion? Should we look about arguments of theological thinking, about what is written in, the primary sources in the holy texts and the like? Or should we look at the practices of the believers, about how they actually argue or how they act when we study religion? What is the thing that defines a religion? Is it its source texts, the holy texts, or is it the actual practice of the believers? Here you can have various different definitions of this, depending upon what kind of study you're doing or what your views on this is. If you're, for example, someone that focuses very much upon the practices rather than the texts, you will go on and do, field studies, studying how people practice it in, practice, rather than look into, the holy texts. If you're going into and thus you do anthropological studies, looking at how do people actually practice these beliefs, what do they act in regards to these beliefs. But if you're into, for example, the philosophy of religion, you might actually look into the sources of the religion, the holy texts, and the philological traditions that developed around these texts, and argue about, you know, how does these connect to the beliefs and the arguments that are proposed here? How coherent are they? They might not even care about the practice of, the believers, because the believers might follow it or they might not, and it might not even be important that they follow it or not. The important thing is the argument inside of the sources. But then you also have, and in this source versus practice question, you also have the question about how important are sources for practice? Are religious rituals, religious actions, and what we attribute to religion just a result of, practice rather than what is actually written in the sources? Do the sources actually matter? There are people that do study religion that argue that the sources are actually not important. The important thing is that, people have these beliefs, like as if the beliefs are separate from the sources and just something that has been passed on by interaction and connection between the believers, and shared beliefs that are kind of like separate from what is ideally said in the sources. Whereas others would say that the sources, the holy texts, and the theological traditions of interpretation and what various authorities say is actually important, because those things do affect the practice. And sometimes they, do according to certain studies, sometimes they do not affect the practice. So these assumptions and ideas about source versus practice are reoccurring in the study of religion, and are one of those big questions that will never be answered. Then you have defining the other from the outside, which is a recurring questions. Are classifications and descriptions from the outside problematic? When we define a group by using certain definitions in our study of religion, saying that we define this group as radical from others, or we define this group as being a cult, or we are defining this group as something else, we also define these groups in descriptions that might have problematic effects, not only for how we interpret them, because we might actually distort them if they are too value loaded or too, you know, narrowly defined in such a way that you can't really go away from these descriptions and describe them in another way, or that, the descriptions and the definitions of these groups are so, narrowly defined that they do not, you know, accept definitions and counterfactual information that could disprove a study. In that regard, defining the other from the outside is a recurring question that you must always consider. And you have also, moral issues here. In if I define this group as this, how might others interpret it, and what might the consequences be here? This is something that I think is, important to think about, especially when you have living traditions. Do you also have to have considerations about you have actually an obligation also to study important things, even if it might cause, you know, people to, not like the results, or the results might be, interpreted by others in a certain way. There is also this entire discussion about interpretation lies in the hands of the interpreter. In other words, even if you try to describe someone in a way that does not, you know, delimit someone or describe them in a negative way or something, if it is interpreted as such by someone else, then they are making the interpretation rather than you. And this goes both ways. It goes, firstly in the way that we make these mistakes when we try to interpret things that are connected to religion, in that we are the ones creating the interpretations. But it also goes in the second degree, in that people that interpret our interpretations might interpret them very differently, even if we make our best case to be as clear as possible. People might still misinterpret us, or we might misinterpret and then spread a misinterpretation. And how we classify and how we ascribe things from the outside can be problematic, especially when we go into greater discussions about power relationships and the like. I think that as long as you're being coherent, firm, and very clear in your ascriptions and clear in your justifications for your descriptions and classifications, and argue for them in a coherent, rational way, you should mostly be fine. But there are certainly a lot of complexity associated with this. And connected to this is that when you discuss, for example, is something to be defined as a cult or religion? And should the term cult even be used? Cult comes from cultus and it meant, religious ritual, and it's actually connected also to culture originally. It comes from the same group of words originally based in Latin. So it is connected to religion as a practice, as an act originally, but then it became used as a word for a either extreme group of religion or a minor group of a religion. And there are arguments to be made that smaller religions that where most of the members of a religion know each other personally, where it is still small enough that everything is based upon personal relationships in the religion, where there aren't that many religious practitioners that you could never know everyone in it, that actually does have effects upon the practitioners, upon their psychology and how the group is maintained. And you also have the idea about new religions and if they should be described as cults. The term cult is very loaded within the study of religion. Some use it. It is mostly rejected by a lot of those that study religion academically, but it is still used in certain contexts of the study of religion. But it's one of these terms that are very much connected to the greater question about defining the other from the outside, about should we give a group this term of cult, since it's it does have negative connotations in popular speech, even if it isn't used negatively in the study of religion sense always. It is interpreted as such, usually by outsider or secondary interpreters of our interpretations in the study of religion. So there is a discussion about that in the study of religion. And the same question is also with regards to extremists or radicals or not, and if they should be used as definitions, for example. Should they be, described as extreme? Extreme in regards to what? And radical in regards to what? And why should we give, the mainstream view of religion or the mainstream, religious tradition more weight in what is the true religion, or what is the true form of this religion? Do we not go into judging religion by using value judgments or not when we use these terms? This is a reoccurring discussion within the study of religion, and this goes also back to if you should do value judgments of religions or not. Should you judge religions when you study them? Should you, apply moral standards and ideas about religion when you study them or not as an object of study? Should you judge them and, be the judge of proper, you know, traits of religion, or what is the true religion or something like that, or if this religion is moral or not? Personally, I think that all value judgments should be kept away from religion, but there are those that argue that you can't get away from doing value judgments of religion, even in the study of religion, where you try to be objective and stay away from value judgments, because you must by definition be subjective due to various philosophical theoretical arguments that they make. And thus, since you are already subjective and you can never get away from being subjective, why not go the entire way and actually be clear in your subjective judgments about religion? Why not just judge it fully? When since you can't be, objective anyway, just be clearly subjective and argue for your case. And both approaches, depending upon context and case, do have their arguments for and against. Then you have definitions about new or old religion. Is there a continuity or not? When we discuss, for example, religion in history, this has also to do with definitions. We usually discuss Christianity as if Christianity or Islam was the same thing in, for example, the early medieval period as it is now. I mean, it is in one way the same religion, but should we define it as the same religion, considering that there are so many things that have changed? And this also, to me, depends upon if there is a continuity or not in certain questions. Sometimes you can define religion as being different or not being the same by clear cases of it. But there are discussions about, should we even discuss older versions of religions as being the same religion? Should we not discuss them as being separate blocks of religion, as being separate religions? And then you go into the discussions about the practicality of this. If you are going to begin to subdivide various religious traditions into smaller religions, how far should we go? Because where does one religion end and where does one new subdivision of religion begin? Because you can subdivide religious traditions almost infinitely, kind of like how you can subdivide historical periods into smaller subdivisions. And these questions are, big questions that you need to answer. How do I define one religion that I, for example, study under a long period, or I have studied from, comparing the past to the present? Where do I discuss it as just being two different traditions, and where do I discuss it as being the same tradition? These answers aren't clear, and they depend a lot upon the case study and your own ideas about a religion and religious change and continuity. Then you have other questions like, is knowledge about religion just a narrative or not? Can we actually get some sort of objective knowledge about religion? Or is knowledge just a great narrative? I reject that knowledge about social phenomena are only narratives, like most postmodernist interpreters would say. I have more of the view that social phenomena are sometimes the result of social constructions, but social constructions are usually the result of very specific historical, material, and ideological processes that aren't just the creation of a narrative or a discussion or a view of the world. When we religion as a social phenomena, we can get knowledge about it that isn't just our subjective description of it. It is something real. We can create something that is knowledge about something that might not in itself be true or exist, might still be valuable knowledge. Because religion, even if a religion isn't true, it's still a thing that has social effects and has effects in real life that we can not always measure, but we can at least describe and get some knowledge about. So I think that knowledge is more than just a knowledge about religion, and knowledge generally is more than just a narrative. It is something that we can get, that can describe real things in the real world, even if the thing itself that is studied isn't real. But this goes into various debates about postmodernism, and is an important thing to discuss sometimes. Then you have comparisons between religions. Are they valid or not? Can we actually compare religions? And this goes back to the thing I talked about, universal religion. Can you make comparisons between various religions? And this depends upon how you define religion, how you define the various religions you are considering doing comparisons with, and how you define the practices, if they are comparable or not. Because if you need to answer these questions before making a comparison between a religion, can you make a valid comparison? Is there something to actually be gained by making this comparison? Or is it just comparing a rock to, for example, a cat? Like, are they two completely different things that shouldn't be compared? Or are they things that are comparable? More like, say, a cat or a lion. These are questions that are reoccurring, which are usually not discussed in discussions about, history, history and religion generally. When we discuss, more everyday discussions or debate about religion. Then comes the next question: should a distance to the religion be kept? What I'm saying here is connected to these ideas about religion just being a narrative, or if we should subjectively judge religion or not. This is a question about how involved emotionally can you yourself be in this religion. There are those that say that emic studies should be avoided because you involve yourself in a way that might make your judgments more subjective and much less valuable for knowledge. And there are those that say that, emic studies are okay. It's okay to, try to practice, to kind of role play the religion or be a true practitioner of it, as long as you can keep, it factual and descriptive and analytical in a coherent way. And then there are those that say that a distance does not need to be kept at all. Just be emotionally invested in it. Describe it subjectively because you cannot get away from it. Be involved in the religion and have your own feelings and, interpretations of the religion inside of it, because you can't get a distance away from it. You can't be anything but subjective in relation to a religion. And then there is also another question that comes up a lot. Is the distinction religious, non-religious valid? Can we actually talk about something being non-religious? And this becomes important. Do you know why, my viewers? It becomes important because religious worldviews, or religions generally, are beliefs about the world, what we think about the world, how we think the world came to be, how the world is. How does that even differ from a modern worldview that says that, oh, it was created by these processes? Or there actually a distinction between religion and non-religious worldviews, for example? Can we actually define something as being non-religious or religious? Some would argue that our view of religious and non-religious are entirely connected with ideas about secularism and about dividing the world in the material and the spiritual world coming from Christianity. I am not entirely sold on that perspective because I do think that other cultures and civilizations have had discussions about the distinctions between religious and non religious. But it's certainly an aspect that can have influenced us in our interpretation about religious, non religious, at least when it comes to uh, Western academics that study religion, in that they do have a tendency towards dividing things in religious and non religious, like saying this is a religious practice, this is a non-religious practice, or this is an idea that is religious and this is a non-religious idea. I i sometimes I want to blend and say that many things that we would call non-religious are actually religious. So I'm more about saying that this this distinction isn't that valid, but on the other hand, I also think that this distinction of religious and non-religious is also necessary, because you need to define religion in some way in order to not make religion mean everything. Because a word that defines everything, that says that is connected to everything and describes everything, describes nothing. You need to have definitions that are delineated, that are limited somewhat in order to actually describe a phenomena. So I do think that non-religious is kind of like something else than religious is important from that aspect. But I do also recognize that a lot of the things that we call non religious from a Western perspective might actually be religious in that it is connected to things we usually call as religious. So, this is a question that occurs a lot in the study of religion, that people in more regular discussions about religion do not think about when we say, oh, we are discussing religion as different from non-religious, and what do you mean by religion and non-religious, for example. And this also goes in, this has a lot of, because it's important here that you do not make assumptions based upon your own beliefs in what you apply as religious and non-religious on other beliefs, because what is religious for one believer might be non-religious for another believer in another religion, or even within the same religion, because religions are different within themselves as well. That is why you have different theological traditions within various religions, after all. Why you have various subgroups of religions. And then you also have, questions about, are religious experiences valid data? Or should we just, take people's, claims about their religion, about their beliefs and their experiences just at face value? I don't think that we should always do it, but I see sometimes that it is valid data, depending upon the question that you pose. Is, for example, this man claiming that he is hearing the voices of God, or having seen God, or having had a religious, you know, experience interacting with the divine, valid in order to, make a statement about the study of divine nature for, the rest of the religious group that might not agree upon this? No, it might not be valid, but it might be valid for a question in the study of religion where you want to study people that do have these religious experiences of meeting God, where you want to, see how do they explain it, how do they feel, how do they express themselves in relation to having these experiences of meeting the divine. In that case, it might be a valid data to use. And this also goes into questions about, should and can you keep your beliefs outside of the study? Should we actually apply our beliefs openly and just be clear about them when we study religion? Or should we try to, distance ourselves from our beliefs and try to be as neutral as possible? or be, not try to force our ideas upon the subject of a study in religion. In discussion and debates about religion more generally, it is usually the case that you do argue clearly from your belief for or against something when you discuss religion. So this is something that differs a lot, because mostly in the academic study of religion, in academics you usually try to avoid, usually, because there are exceptions here, with, for example, the study of theology, or you know religious philosophy, and certain theoretical frameworks about narrative creation and postmodernism, that do say that you can actually impose your ideas and your beliefs upon the subject without issues, or you should do it anyway because you can't avoid it. Where there generally, in more general discussions, it's much less frowned upon or much less controversial to impose your own beliefs in a discussion or debate of religion. It's much more seen that, oh, this is just part of religious discussion or debate, that you try to insert your beliefs in the discussion or in the matter. Then you have the last big question, though there are many more big questions. I just took some examples here that are, usually discussed in academic circles, that but are not discussed usually in more normal debates and discussions about religion. And that is that, are religious beliefs the primary active factor or the result of other factors? For example, do we see the religion or religiosity as a result of other social factors or conditions? Or do we see religion as something that affects other things? So, for example, from a materialist viewpoint, not that I, necessarily promote it here, or have, or that I, share this kind of viewpoint, you could argue that religious beliefs are just a reflection of material conditions of people living in poverty. They seek solace in the belief in God, for example, and thus they, are believers because they live in poor conditions. Their, religiosity and their religion is a result of the society that they live in, or they have beliefs about justice and charity due to the fact that they are poor and they want others to give them charity, or there are other factors that create the religious belief or the religion. But the other view is that religion isn't just a reaction, it is an active force that affects believers to actually act in certain ways, because you have beliefs about the world. And if you believe a certain thing about the world, you will act in accordance to those beliefs. For example, if you are in the middle of a, train railway, and you believe a train is about to, come, you will move out of the way because you do not want to get hit by the train. In the same way, you will try to act in accordance to a religion because you believe in that religion. You believe that if you do not act in this certain way that the religion prescribes, you will be punished for it. And you want to avoid punishment, for example, hellfire or something similar. The God being angry with you and punishing you in this life, or, anything. You will act in accordance to that belief, is the other viewpoint. So, but you also have, various middle grounds here as well. And you have various theoretical frameworks that are discussed a lot in the study of religion, but are almost never discussed in more, ordinary debate or discussions about religion. Which is a shame, because I think that these meta discussions that I discussed here about big questions of the study of religion, that you need to usually answer in a lot of your studies, or answer, or at least think about when you make an academic study of religion, are things that could very well actually add to the level of discourse, add to the level of discussion, a more general debate and discussion of religion. So that's that. Now I'm looking at questions. Oh, hello, Deste. Hello, hello. I'm glad seeing you here. I was kind of doing a PowerPoint presentation. It has been going on for a lot now, so I'm probably going to just end about the academic study of religion. So I'm going to present a bit more about this PowerPoint, and then I will probably have a later discussion about how we discuss religion more generally in comparison to discussing religion and studying religion at a more academic level. Uh, so I will go back to presenting in the PowerPoint again. Now, methods in the study of religion. I mean, in a discussion or debate, you just discuss religion. Usually, you just discuss it very generally and just talk about religion in a general discussion or debate about religion outside of the academic study of religion. And sometimes if it is a higher debate or discussion, you might introduce some sort of source or discussing an holy text or like, but you do not have concrete methods generally in these sort of discussions or debates about religion, where you go into methods about getting material or methods in order to find out knowledge about a religion or a group of religious practitioners or believers, and finding out what they think or what they practice, or how their beliefs and practices affect the world and the like. There are methodology that exists in the study of religion that does not exist in general debate and discussion. And generally, you have several examples of methods in the study of religion. I'm just presenting some examples of what is usually done. You can do a lot of other stuff here than what I propose here. You can do field studies on the spot. A field study is, where you go to a place and you go to a place and you study on the spot, on the place. For example, you go to a mosque or a church and you notice how the believers practice religion. And you can also engage in them. Or, you can do distance observation where you stand aside and you do not engage in it, you just observe it. Because you want to, be on the place, on the field, doing the field study, observing how the religion is practiced. Sometimes you might, as I said before, engage in the practice as well, because you want to, know how it is of being a part of it. Because there are some people argue that you do get some knowledge by actually doing the practice yourself, and there are ways to argue for this, and I do. Some are more legitimate than others. Some I can, see the value in actually practicing certain rituals in order to understand them and understand what people go through doing them. For example, if you're going to do, a study on, for example, let's say fasting, you ought to, for example, have fasted yourself, because you need to have some understanding about how it feels to fast, or how, what the problems are, and how much of a hassle or not of a hassle it is doing a fast, for example. But there are other cases where you could say that actually being part of the practice actually does not add something to it. But it really much depends upon what is studied and what the focus of the study of religion is. And field study isn't just it mustn't be practices where you engage in practices. It can also be where it's usually that you do a distance observation where you go to the place and just observe. That's and you write down what you observe or you film what you observe, and you use that as a material. It mustn't be the second case where it is an experiential methods where you experience religion directly, where you do religious role play as a believer, or you might even be a believer doing these acts and recording them as you do them. This is experiential methods are mostly emic. They are from the inside perspective, since it is the inside perspective that you are really doing these religious actions within, rather than a field study that is not doing any sort of practices, which is mostly the ethic perspective, the outside perspective. And you can also have interviews where you do a free form interview where you ask and just have a discussion with a believer and you record it in order to notice interesting things regarding a subject or matter that you want to study, that people believe about when you do a study of religion. I mean, since I mostly study older text and older religion, I do not do interviews, and I do not mostly study studies of religion that do interviews, because that is not my main field of study, and it's not connected to what I study in history. But you can do this in the study of religion generally. You can do interviews that can be free form, just general discussions about a subject or matter, and it just flows naturally, where you just ask and then you ask another thing, just depending upon how he answers. Or you can have ordered questions where you have clearly defined questions that you ask in an interview, where you just want the interviewer to answer them clearly. And these interviews can be written, or they can be where they have to answer in various service, or they can be interviews in person, where you just ask them and you record the interviews with with recording devices, rather than having a written down answer in a survey. And these interviews are probably one of the more loaded things when it comes to questions about privacy and integrity, where depending upon the material and what is said in the interview and how you asked for permission before, might get you into various moral conundrums, because they might have said something that they regretted, or you might actually see that they said something that ought maybe not to be showed to people. Even if it is interesting, it might not be good to actually publicize that part, even if it would affect the result of the study if it was published. And you do have to have considerations here, because there are a lot about things about privacy and things said in these interviews that could be things that are important to consider in a academic study of religion. I mean, in the case where you do an interview or do some sort of back and forth in a more relaxed general discussion of religion outside of the study of academia, this is usually not the case, in that you have stringent rules applied to what you can do and what you can't do. But I still think that you should sometimes, when you do an interview as a layperson of a religious person, or in an interview outside of academia, you should consider the implications of releasing the information in an interview. And then you have also textual analysis, which is what I mostly do when it comes to the study of religion, or studies of religion that I usually depend upon, where you can for example do studies of canonical sources like holy texts and, you know, texts that are used in the religion as the primary material. For example, the Quran in Islam and the Hadiths, the Bible in Christianity, the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism and such. And you also have other material that can be studied, a theological, such as a philological text or theological texts in plural. And you also have third-party material discussing a religion that you can study. You can study, for example, you know, people's polemics against a religion or their defense of a religion. You know, in discussions on, for example, in newspapers, on the forums and various social media. Though there are rules about what you are able to, actually use as data due to various ethical considerations, because universities and academia have actually a lot of ethical rules and boundaries about what data you are allowed to use and what you are allowed to use for a study, because you do not want to make public data that could be problematic for individual persons in a lot of cases. It also depends upon how public these persons are. If they are more public, it is usually, if they are much more famous person, it's that have a greater public face, it's usually considered more okay to publish material about them. But if you have a person that you're using as a subject in a study that is not a famous person, or he is participating without his knowledge, then there are a lot of rules that apply that you need to consider. That these rules are usually not considered in the same way when for example, are discussing in a regular discussion or debate about religion, about some sort of tweet on Twitter or like, about a person that you knew personally, or that someone other person that you knew have followed. These things aren't considered in general discussions and debates of a more popular nature, but they are considered when you discuss the academic study of religion, and when you use, for example, Twitter tweets and other public statements and textual things when discussing religion. I'm generally talking about modern material. I'm mostly, concerned with medieval texts and texts, source texts that, are the primary sources of a religion, like the Quran and the Hadith. And those are usually a lot more lax about the use about them or going into them and, discussing them. There isn't many moral considerations that are obligatory to be considered. Usually, the only thing is, there are some considerations sometimes about the morality of getting older material, and those things are usually connected to was the manuscripts that you use for this study actually acquired in an ethical way, because sometimes if the manuscript that you were using as a source for your argument, even if it does not affect the result or affect you know uh, the arguments in in their truthfulness, or how factually correct they are, in that the source is completely fine in itself when it comes to be used as a source for an argument. But if the source or as a manuscript was acquired by, for example, illegal action, let's say that you acquired this manuscript on the black market. You know that this manuscript is actually reliable. You have carbon dated it, and you have seen that this material uses the style that was used during this time, and it's a reliable source historically, and for a certain religious phenomena or historical event. It's a correct material to be able to use for a study. But if it was acquired illegally, like on the black market, or you stole it, or you copied a text that you did not have legal access to, then it does sully your rest of your work, because there are rules about the fruits of the poisoned, uh, the results of the poisoned fruit. In that, if you do have a situation where your results and even your methods are fine, and the fact of the matter is that the study is actually fine in itself, but the material for the study was acquired in an you know immoral way. Sometimes it can actually lead to your study being taken down if you have published it, because you aren't supposed to profit from immoral action, or illegal action. Though it also depends, sometimes they make you know exceptions for this. If you, for example, did a study on a minority group that you aren't allowed to speak about in a country, for example, or you did studies about matters that are forbidden to be studied in that country, but you went into it clandestinely and you studied these matters in that country and then returned back, then depending upon the arguments that you use against breaking these local laws, sometimes you can get away with it, sometimes, and sometimes not. It really much depends upon the context. For example, you could argue that a minority that is persecuted needs to be studied in order that their religious ideas be recorded and written down. If it is, for example, a religious group that does not have a written holy text, for example, a religious group in some sort of area that is hard to get to usually, but and that the government has said that no, these native religious groups are no longer allowed to have their native religions, then, and you aren't allowed to actually promote them or study them, then it might be allowed from the university side for you to actually go there and study them, even despite you actually breaking the laws of the host country, and then publish the information. So just because something is illegal does not mean that it will be considered as immorally, poisoned fruit that makes your study not publishable or makes people take down your study. It really much depends upon the context. When it comes to textual analysis, is when you get the text, or when you do interviews or the like. There are a lot of considerations here. And also, but I'm getting sidetracked again just speaking about these things. You have video and pictorial and analysis, and these are cases with visual religion. This is not much the case in Islam, since Islam is not a visual religion. It's quite the opposite, since most traditions of Islam says that picture art of religious figures is this either discouraged or seen as a form of shirk, of polytheistic religion that should not be allowed, of idolatry. And you have traditions also within Judaism and Christianity that are similar. But you have, on the other hand, also traditions within, for example, Orthodox Christianity, where icons are extremely important. Pictures of the saints and holy people in the religion are considered important. You have Hinduism with all of their depictions of gods and the like. And, where, physical depictions of the gods have a religious function, where this visual aspect is very important. They even have a term in Hinduism that I forgotten, where they say that viewing something, seeing something with your eyes, is kind of like a religious action. Staring into the idols, staring into the art and being caught up in it is kind of like a religious action. In these cases, actually having video and pictorial you know material and doing analysis of these, you know, religious, religiously important physical things of these pictures and the like, and of these statues, might actually be important and might be justified to do analysis do through. This is, going into a methodology that is usually on a much, you know, more detailed level than just saying, "Oh, look at this, painting, or look at this statue. Doesn't it look funny?" Which is more of the, you know, discussion when people discuss religion generally on a more popular level. They might, discuss, oh, just a statue as being, oh, it's beautiful, or it's this, but they don't really discuss a lot of the, symbolism inherent in the, statues, or the coloring, or why they do view these statues during certain hours in order to make the light influence the viewing of the statue, because the viewing of the statue is a religious act, because it connects you to the divine that the, statue is a representation of, for example, in Hinduism. Oh, hello, Hidalgo de Andalusia. Happy seeing you here. I'm currently at a bit of the at an end of the presentation, because I kind of saw that this will otherwise drag on a lot when it comes to, discussing religion, and this live stream has already gone 1 hour over of what I thought it would be. But I will just finish this part of the presentation, and then I will probably have a live stream in not the next week, but maybe in 2 weeks, where I will continue what I'm discussing here about religion. But right now, I'm just going to go to a finish point in this presentation, because my voice and my English speaking ability is getting a little bit diminished due to the sheer fact that my vocal cords and my ability to concentrate on my speech is getting a bit tired for having spoken continuously now for more than 3 hours, and having also spoken a lot previously this day, and having held discussions on a higher level that have been quite intense in real life before I made this live stream. So, as I was, discussing before, academic study of religion in short. It is distinct from merely discussing religion in a more popular sense, because it has methodologies, it has theories, it has fields of studies where you usually keep within those fields, and you consider a lot of heavy questions in a way that you do not consider in a general discussion, in a general more, you know, debate or discussion that you have with friends, or you have with some other person in a more relaxed setting that isn't academic. So, an academic study of religion is quite distinct from merely discussing religion in that sense. And it's has also ideals about, keeping yourself away from the subject discussed, and, trying to not be judgmental in a way that most general discussion of religion and debates about religion do not have. In fact, in those matters, you do try to impose your kind of view or your judgments. And the academic study of religion is a very broad field also with a lot of considerations that makes it quite distinct from discussing religion. And debating religion can also be very broad, but it does not have these preconditions and these considerations usually to it that you have to consider before you enter it. Though, as I will go through in the next live stream when we continue this discussion about religion, there is a lot of considerations that you should make when discussing and debating religion generally, and that I think that a lot of people would actually improve their experiences of discussing religion if they actually took into consideration. And also, the academic study of religion is usually not prescriptive in that it usually does not deal with oughts due there are, though, as I did say during this presentation, there are exceptions to this, but it is generally descriptive from various perspectives, from an inside or outside perspective. When you do a study of religion or discuss religion academically, you're usually being descriptive or analyzing something. You're not trying to talk about how a religion ought to be or if this religion should be valued in a certain way or considered as being true or not. And you know and when you do an academic study of religion, you try to do it with various focuses rather than trying to, you focus upon something to study it and to discuss how you should analyze it, how you should describe it in a greater context. You do not try to, focus upon things in order to try to say how this ought to be, how people ought to act with regards to something. The academic study of religion is not generally outside there to preach something, to say that this is how you ought to be. Though there are, of course, exceptions to this, as I mentioned, the philosophy of religion. When you study, for example, theological traditions and try to argue in relation to them, and try to make various coherent arguments, for example, ethics of religion and such, then you do have elements that are prescriptive, how things ought to be. But generally, and you also have some theoretical traditions of, for example, postmodernist thinking that does argue that you should have a prescriptive element because your research and or your study of religion is part of a greater narrative creation of norms. You can never get away from creating norms, and thus you ought to own it and actually control it and be obviously prescriptive. I don't agree with that later view. I do kind of see the point with the philosophy of religion when you go into arguing about various theological traditions and the ethics related to religion, that there you do have a prescriptive element in the academic study of religion. But generally, usually not prescriptive, but descriptive from various perspectives and with various focuses. That is what makes the academic study of religion different, in short, from general populist discussion and debates about religion, which I will go into on the next live stream and discuss. So, is there anyone that wants to post some sort of question or something? I am still here to, answer questions if you want me to answer any sort of question here. I'm always open for questions. Is there anyone that wants to post a question or something? If not, I would probably say that I will end this stream, since we have already talked more than an hour than I thought it would take. And I will talk about the second part of this presentation, about how we discuss and debate religion in a more populist way, and how you and other people's discussing religion ought to, discuss it, and how we can, raise the level of discussion, and how people ought to discuss religion more generally in a way that is a bit counter, intuitive to how most people discuss religion and what most people think about religion. Because I think that there are important discussions to be had in a more less academic way, but that still needs to have some sort of rules, or rather principles, accompanying them, and considerations accompanying discussions about religion, that I think are fruitful for, good discourse and good discussions regarding this very important topic that religion is, as religion connects to everything from morality, politics, to the greater society, to how we view the world. Because I think that this is such an important topic that we need to be able to discuss in a more, way that we need to be able to discuss religion outside of academia as well, on a higher level than we currently do. And thus I will be discussing, general discussion and debate about religion, and how we ought to confront it and discuss it generally on the next live stream that will probably happen not in this coming week, but probably in the next week. I will post in the community post, so that we can continue with like a second part of this live stream where I discussing religion and debating religion in a more populist, non-academic way, and things that we ought to take into consideration when we do it, where we discuss religion in a goal-oriented way, about convincing and learning religion by exposure and intercommunication between people, rather than studying it in a formal academic sense. And I will say this, my viewers, it has been a pleasure doing this live stream and discussing matters with you. I hope to see you once again when I do the next live stream. Now, signing out, and I hope you a good future and a prosperous life.